Yeah. Okay. So hi everyone, and thanks for joining and listening. I mean, logging in to listen to my talk. So I'll be, as Sharda explained, I'll be talking about cats generally, mostly small cats, and also a very little bit about the domestic cat and how it came about. And I'll be sprinkling my talk with these quotes that I have picked up on cats and which I thought were connected, although they are all mostly around the house cat, but it applies really well to all other cats. And I'll talk about why cats are pretty much the same, whether they're the house cat or the tiger in many ways. So are all cats gray in the dark? So the phrase means that it doesn't matter in the dark, everything looks the same. So I often get these photographs from people in field. They send me these photos. Very often it's from inside the forest, and they think it is a wildcat, a new discovery, or a new, not a new discovery, but a new record for that particular region where they are studying. So this one is from Ranthambore, and Ranthambore Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan. And this person sent me this photograph and said that he thought it was a species of wildcat, either the wildcat, the Asiatic wildcat, or the rusty spotted cat. But it actually is the house cat. And everybody is pretty surprised that a house cat would even be found deep inside a forest, because we think of them as, domestic cats. Like, you don't find domestic dogs deep inside the forest by themselves. But cats are cats, and they live just like the wildcat. So I'll move on, and I'll talk a little bit about the wildcats now. So I'm not able to move the slide. Okay. So I'll first tell you the difference between dogs and cats, a little bit about how they fall into two very different groups actually. So when we think of carnivores and we think of, dogs and cats as being carnivores, so they're very similar. Yes, they are related, but they fall into two major groups, the carnivores. So there are carnivores that are cat-like, and there are carnivores that are dog-like. So it's Feliformia and Caniformia. And this is like the family tree of carnivores, and it shows you the relatives of the cat and the dogs. So you'll be surprised to know that the hyena is actually more closely related to the cat than the dog. Although many people think that, in form it looks, morphologically, or in its appearance is very similar to that of a dog. So if you look at the dog-like carnivores, you have the wild dog, you have the panda, and you have a bear, okay, and you have mustelids, which are like the weasels and the martens. And of course, there are many more. And I've just given you the 6 by 35 means out of the 35 canids found in the world, 6 are found in India. Out of the 8 ursids, those are bears that are found in the world, 4 are found in India. So I've just given you like a estimate of how many carnivores India has, and in each family. So India is of course really, really rich in carnivores, and especially so in cats, and I'll come to that later. And when you talk about cats, you see that they have the viverids, the linsang, the you have the small Indian civet, the palm civet, all these are, and the mongoose, they're all closer to the cats than the dogs. And of course, like I said, the hyena is also it belongs to the Feliformia suborder. And now when you come to the 7 species of cats that are species as of now described of cats, and you see I've colored them in this orange and blue. So the ones in orange are the ones that are found in India, and the ones in blue are the ones that are found in South America. Now, why I have split India from South America? Because these are the two regions that are really, really rich in cats. All cats, big and small. And if you look, there is a very clear difference over here that you can see in pattern between the South American cats and the Indian cats. So if you look at the Indian cats, the red ones or the orange ones, they're scattered all across the tree. You find them like almost in every lineage that you can see. You know, you have the Panthera lineage, Baycat lineage, Caracal lineage, Ocelot lineage, the lynx lineage, the Puma lineage, leopard and domestic cat, leopard cat lineage and the domestic cat lineage. So you find the Indian cats almost across the cat tree, you know. So India has representatives of almost all the lineages. Whereas in South America, you will see that there are only two different lineages, the Puma lineage and the Ocelot lineage. Now, this actually has a lot of conservation implications, and it says a lot about just looking at the tree. It tells you even about what has happened in the evolutionary history of cats. So for instance, why is it that India has cats scattered across, and why is it that South America has them clumped? So the reason is that in India, there have been emigrations or immigrations or migrations of cats from different places, because we are positioned in a particular way, and I'll talk about that a little later again. And that's why we have representatives of cats coming in from everywhere. Whereas in South America, they have actually speciated or originated there. And so they are more closely related, and they are of a particular kind. So both of them have very different conservation values. An area where there is a lot of speciation happening is, of course, something that you would want to protect, because it's, that's where the cat species have originated from. And an area where there's a lot of colonization happening, like in India, is also very important, because what it says is that we have many different habitats to offer to these cats who have come from different places. So what is it that makes cats so unique? Why are they so different from other predators? Of course, every family is unique, but cats are very special because they are the only entire family that is completely carnivorous. They are also known as mega carnivores or hyper carnivores. It's because they cannot survive on anything other than meat. So they require meat for their very basic survival. Their physiologies are built around that. So even with a domestic cat, if you don't give it meat, especially when it is a young kitten, it's very likely not to survive. It will die. Like, people often give them milk and rice, cooked rice. But, that's just not enough nutritionally for a cat, because their physiologies are such that they just have to have meat. There are certain vitamins and other important nutrients that the cat cannot manufacture on its own, which other animals do. And so they get it out of the meat that they eat. And because of that, their entire bodies are built only to hunt. So if you look at every feature of a cat, it is all selected for the purpose of hunting or killing, And and that is one of the reasons why people feel that's the reason why the tiger and, if you look at the spectrum of cats, they all look so similar. Anyone can tell that a tiger is a cat. But if you look at the spectrum of, species from, from say canids in the dog family, they look pretty different. And they don't look as similar as, cats do to each other. And so if you look at the features, if you look at the eyes, and they are built, their eyes are like primate eyes. They face completely in the front, and they have pupils. Especially, that the domestic cat has these elongated pupils, and that is because it can it can contract and it can expand to its maximum level, and it can take in as much light as possible, which suggests that they are basically nocturnal. And so similarly, if you look at the larger cats, they have small pupils. They are more diurnal than the smaller cats. So their pupils are smaller, and even their eyes in proportion to the face is smaller. So in a house cat and in other smaller cats like rusty spotted cat and even the leopard cat and all the other small cats, if we had eyes, if we had eyes in the same proportion to the face as they have, then our eyes would be the size of tennis balls. So you can see that one of the major sensories that they use are the eyes. The vision is one of the, they're very visual animals. And then even their noses are definitely, they're not as good as, say, the canid or the dog's nose, because they have a blunter face and they have, a much smaller area where the turbinals or the bones that actually are involved in sensing smell are present. And so their sense of smell may not be as good as that of the dog, but it still is really good. And they rely a lot on the sense of smell for reproduction, for marking their territories, and to sense who else has come into their homes or their ranges. And then, of course, their ears are also, they can hear very well. And often you will find small cats, especially the ones who live in open areas and in deserts, they have large ears. And I guess that is also because they can, maybe they need that to focus the sound into their ear canals. And then their teeth are very, very, unique. So they have very few teeth as compared to the other carnivores. For example, dogs have between 42 to 44 teeth. And whereas the cat has between 28 to 30 teeth. So a lot of their teeth have reduced, especially the molars. And the reason being that, the reduction of teeth has made their faces blunter, which means that the two major teeth that they use for killing and for cutting have the maximum force. So if you see, the canine is like a dagger, and what we know as the molars, what we call the carnassials, are like scissors. So that is actually pretty much all that they really have. The incisors are really tiny, and the other molars, which are not the carnassials, have been reduced to such an extent that they are almost not functional. So what they do is they have the canines to kill, and then they have the incisors to cut the meat. And all cats are similar in that. So if you look at the skull of a tiger and the skull of a small house cat, unless you're really very experienced in looking at skulls, you will just say that this is a bigger version of the other, or this is a smaller version of the other. They look so similar. And similarly, if you look at the pug marks, I don't know if you can tell the difference between one of them is a tiger and one of them is a house cat. And I have just scaled it, in similar proportions to show that they are identical. So, even they're small, the tiny features, if you look at, if you break it down to individual features, they are pretty much very, very similar. And then, as I said, that there are 41 species of cats worldwide, and India has 15 species, which is like the largest number, in any country, like globally. So we have the largest cat, which is the tiger, which is around 200 to 250 kilos. And we also have the smallest cat, which is the rusty spotted cat, which is around 1 kilo, which weighs around 1 kilo. So you look at the span of body sizes and body masses, is enormous, and still they look so similar. And I find that really, really fascinating. So, everybody has heard about the tiger, of course, but, very, very few people will know that the rusty spotted cat, perhaps especially in South India, lives in your backyard in many places. So we have rusty spotted cats on campus at SACON. So these are really tiny, very beautiful cats, and the smallest in the world. And they are found just in India, Sri Lanka, and in Nepal, the area that borders India. So actually the maximum population of this species survives in India. And as I was saying that India, we are very fortunate in our geographical location because we have elements or species, not just cats, even other taxa, which come in from many other different places, like you have from the African uh, regions, and you have from the Indo-Malayan region, as well as you have from the Palearctic region. So we have species that have come into India from many different areas, and over a period of several thousands of years or millions of years, they have actually colonized India, and India has offered them a lot of these, various different habitats. So the Wildlife Institute of India, this is a biogeographic biotic provinces map, which is basically, the landscape of India divided into different parts that make ecological sense, where they are related to the climatic conditions or the kind of soil that's found there, or even to the kind of habitats for ecosystems that are found in these areas. So this is a map that geographic classifications available for, by different groups. But the one that I have used is made by the Wildlife Institute of India. So you can see that India can be broken up into many different biotic provinces. And if you project the cat species that are found in these provinces, you get a pattern. More information is available. I think I created the map maybe around 5 or 6 years ago. And since then, there are new records of species that have been found in Haryana. So it won't be so white over here in this place. It won't be so white. It will probably be a lighter shade of green. And that goes to show that we still know very little about the distribution of many of these cats. But all said and done, there are two areas that really stick out, and which we can call our landscapes for cats, or cat landscapes. And these are the westernmost part of India in Gujarat, Rajasthan, and the northeastern part, which is Arunachal, Meghalaya, Nagaland. And these two regions are, as you can see, they have extreme climatic conditions also. I mean, they're very different from each other. And and as I said, when cats came in from different regions of the world, like the cats that came in from the Indo-Malayan region, they colonized the northeastern region, and the cats that came from the African area, they colonized the western part. So, and I'll talk about that a little later, about how the jungle cat is actually, probably something that is very, very, and the rusty spotted cat, they are really Indian cats in some ways. So, so if you look at this is a series of cats that are found in landscapes in Western India, specifically Gujarat and Rajasthan. And you see there are 8 of them, 9 including the cheetah, which are very unfortunately we have lost, shamefully and unfortunately. And so if the cheetah was around, we would have had 16 cats. But here, these 9 cats are the ones that represent the landscapes in Western India. So you have the caracal, the jungle cat, the Asiatic wildcat, you have the fishing cat, rusty spotted cat, and then you have the larger cats, the leopard, tiger, Asiatic lion, and we used to have the Asiatic cheetah. So there is something very striking, and I'll talk about that a lot more in the subsequent slides. But if you see, most of the cats over here, the small ones, have very tiny tails. If you look at the caracal and the jungle cat and the fishing cat, their tails are much shorter than the entire length of their head and body. And then if you look at the wildcat, Asiatic wildcat and the rusty spotted cat, they have slightly longer tails. They are the medium-sized tails. They have tails that are of intermediate size. And then we go to the northeastern part, which I mentioned is the other region, which is really exceptionally rich in cats. There also you find 9 cats, perhaps more, but what we know of is 9. And you have the clouded leopard and the marble cat, who have enormously long tails. And look at their coats. They are so similar in appearance because they are forest dwelling cats. It's very indicative. You know, they have long tails that helps them climb a tree, use the third dimension, and they have coats that help them camouflage in the forest. And they look so similar, but the clouded leopard is much larger than the marble cat. Marble cat is actually the size of a house cat. And it has a very, very long tail. And then you also have the jungle cat and the fishing cat over there, but they occur in the plains. They do not occur in the higher reaches of, the real dense forested areas. They occur near the wetlands, near the Brahmaputra Valley. And you have the golden cat, which is really a very, very special cat, because I'll show you slides later where they come in many, many different patterns and colors. And in fact, some of them are so different that you wouldn't even believe it's the same species. And this is something that is like, people are thinking about it now. We are collating information from all across the golden cat distribution to see how its coat pattern varies and why does it vary. So this one is a very rich red color that was captured in Arunachal Pradesh. And these cats and the leopard cat, which is a very beautifully spotted cat, which is also found in the Western Ghats, they have medium-sized tails. And then you have the larger cats. You have the tiger, leopard, and you also have the snow leopard in Arunachal, in the higher reaches. And then you have cats that inhabit the Trans-Himalayas, which are the Palearctic elements that have come in. And you have this very strange looking cat called the Palas's cat. It's really, it's funny even in its mannerisms. And it lives in the cold desert plateau areas, and especially in areas in Ladakh, and also outside India and Mongolia and China and some parts of Afghanistan, Pakistan. And then you have the Eurasian lynx. So there are many different lynxes found. You have the Canadian lynx, you have the Iberian lynx, and you have the Eurasian lynx. The Eurasian lynx is the largest of the lynxes. And here I must tell you, so the cats, you can actually divide them into the large cats. And then you also have the medium-sized cats, like the lynx and the golden cat and the clouded leopard. And then you have the smaller ones, which are less than 10 kilos in body mass, more or less. And then, as I said, you also have the snow leopard in Arunachal. And in Ladakh, of course, snow leopards are found like majorly in Himachal and Ladakh, and Sikkim and Arunachal in the Trans-Himalayas, basically. And here, like I said, the marble cats, this is a photograph we obtained from Eagle Nest, that is in Arunachal, a spectacular place, which I think everybody should visit. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's probably the most beautiful spot in India. And you have this very beautiful cat, the marble cat over there, who has this enormously long tail. And we have a video of this cat that we captured on camera. And I would like to show you how the tail is never ending. It's just, there is this small cat and it has this long tail. It almost looks like the tail is propelling the cat. Okay, it's still on the video. And then you have the leopard cat, which has a medium-sized tail. It's probably the most common cat in kind of not very dense forests, but not open areas. So in the Western Ghats, it's the most common cat that you find. And it is, again, it figures very prominently in trade, illegal trade, because of its beautiful coat. And even in Eagle Nest in Arunachal, they were the most abundant cat species that we found. And then you have the jungle cat, which is the most common cat species in the open areas in India. It is probably the most successful cat in India. It occurs in agricultural fields because its habitat is an open scrub area. So when you cut forests and convert them into agriculture, it actually simulates their habitat. So sugarcane fields, rice fields, and they eat rodents. And so this is like something, it really helps them. So they use all these human landscapes a lot. So you would find many of these small cats, especially like the leopard cat and the jungle cat, they occur, much of their population occurs outside protected areas. And that's why we need a different approach towards their conservation, you know. And this cat has a very tiny tail. And like I said, there are coat patterns that vary. So you have all these are coat patterns of a leopard cat, of the leopard cat. And you see, this is across this global distribution. So in India, you will find them with rosettes. And as you go further east, the rosettes are converted into tiny spots. And even the color changes, you know, the ones that are found in Afghanistan are much paler than the ones that are found in Western Ghats, which are much richer in color. And these are the different morphs I was telling you of the golden cat. So we found at least 4 different colors and patterns of the golden cat in Eagle Nest. So you have the gray, you have the red, you have a complete melanistic or black one. And then you have one that's patterned. You can't see it very well here, but it just looks like a tiger, a little tiger. And then, as you know, now we come to the domestic cat. So there is this quote that's often mentioned, which says that cats at one time were worshipped as gods, and they haven't forgotten it. And you know that the domestic cat, its behavior and its characteristics are really different from the other most favored pet, that is the dog. So cats live on their own terms, and that's why this phrase that says, you know, that cats were worshipped and they haven't forgotten this. And although we know that the large cats are worshipped, you know, in mythology, like, you know, we have, especially in India, we have tigers featuring as either gods or vehicles of gods, and even the leopard is worshipped. Like this is, although this is a picture of a tiger, in Sanjay Gandhi National Park, they have leopards in place of the tiger because that's what is present over there. And they have temples specifically for the cat, and that is the major deity over there. But in other places, like in Egypt, they actually worship small cats, which I find absolutely amazing. So especially in this place called Bubastis, where they had a lot of cat temples, and they have this very major cat goddess called the Bastet, which is the statue over here, which is like a really ancient statue which they dug out. And then in Japan, you have these shrines for cats. You know, they have this lucky cat, what they call a cat that brings luck, and the Maneki Neko, which actually beckons you. It moves its hands and it actually beckons you into. So it's supposed to be lucky for business houses and people who have shops. But where have these domestic cats come from, and why were they worshipped? So one of the hypotheses is that cats have domesticated themselves. So as humans move towards agriculture, you know, we also brought in rodents, a lot of rodents towards us because of the grains that we grew or the food that we grew. And that attracted a lot of these wildcats. And especially because agriculture started in the Fertile Crescent, and there you have this cat called the African wildcat, which was probably more common than the others. And they started coming towards human households, and they, in a way, domesticated themselves. And they say that is probably one of the reasons why you don't, you know, cats are still very pretty much wild. So they say that there isn't much of a difference in the behavior of house cats versus the wild cats. And that I bring it back to the first slide that I showed, that you find house cats even in the deepest forests. And that shows that they are pretty self-reliant even without us. And the photograph below is of a feral domestic cat, and you can see that there's very little. I mean, unless you're an expert, even I really wouldn't be able to tell the difference at all between these two cats. If somebody showed me a photograph like this and an African wildcat, if it was, you know, we have the Asiatic wildcat, and we have many domestic cats that look exactly like the Asiatic wildcat. So the Asiatic wildcat has much darker spots on its body than the African one. And we have many domestic cats that look just like that. And they were worshipped because perhaps they ate rodents which were seen as pests, and these were like natural predators of the pests or natural pest control mechanisms. And that also suggests that these small cats have a very strong what you call as ecosystem services. They actually provide us these services by controlling pests. And that is one of the things that we are trying to look at and address in human dominated landscapes, which actually harbor quite a few of these cats. You have the rusty spotted cat, you have the jungle cat, you have the caracal that come into these, and even the fishing cat that come into these crop fields. And they are not a threat the way tigers and leopards are, because tigers and leopards get into much more serious conflict because they can even kill people, and they cause very severe economic losses. Whereas the small cats are often unnoticed, and people don't really, they neither have negative or positive feelings for them. But we can easily turn that into a more positive picture by telling them that they're actually providing you some very essential services. And maybe that is one way to address their conservation. So that is it. That's what I had for today. And maybe then the next talk, I will be talking about how we study these cats, because they're so cryptic, and they're so shy, and they're nocturnal, and they're small, and they're rare. And so how do we go around studying them? So this is what I had for today. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharmila. That was extremely fascinating. And like you put it, truly a tale of coats and tails, and through coats and tails. That was really riveting. Thank you so much. I think we can open up.
Thank you.
I think we can open up the session for a few questions and answers, because we have time. So if anyone has a question, we would like to, you can unmute, you can ask to unmute. Actually, all of people can unmute on their own as well. So is there any question? Yes. Please go ahead, Anita.
Yeah. Hi, Shomika. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Hi. It's really nice. I missed your first talk, the first time you talked here. So I'm very happy to have joined now. And it was very interesting. Thank you so much. And I had a question. So when a species like the cats, when they are so specialized in, I mean, I would say specialized a little bit in the sense that they can only be carnivorous.
Yeah.
Does that become a disadvantage for them?
It becomes a disadvantage if the prey are in some way targeted and removed, right? So for the larger cats, a lot of their problems are because their prey are hunted by humans and taken away. With the smaller cats, I doubt if that is a problem, unless you use rodenticides in such major ways that that really badly impact them, which could be a problem actually, because especially in many areas, especially in the Northeast, what we found is that the agriculture, so these departments work basically they work individually, right? They don't contact or they don't talk to each other. So you will have the forest department, and you'll have the agriculture department, and the agriculture department actually, to promote horticulture and agriculture, they give away free rodenticides and pesticides. And they use them, the people over there just use them rampantly. And we really have no idea in what way it is impacting cats. Not just by killing their prey, but also probably poisoning them. So it is a very major problem, could be a very major problem that needs to be studied.
Interesting. So a bit like diclofenac for the vultures, right? We could end up in that kind of a scenario.
Yeah, I mean, diclofenac is actually very, very dangerous for too, because it's the same physiology that makes vulture. Diclofenac is what they give cattle, and they give the larger, herbivores. So it won't probably impact the smaller cats, but in smaller cats, they use rodenticides and pesticides,
Right,
and they
right.
just spray them everywhere
Yeah.
on the crops.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to
Okay.
prevent
Right, right.
rodents from attacking.
Yeah, that's something we thank you so much. That's something I hadn't thought about, That was very
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. Okay.
thanks.
So do we have anyone else who would like to ask a question? Okay, if there is no one else who's putting their hand up, I'm putting mine up. I had a question. You showed the variation, the coat patterns for the same cat
Yeah.
across the globe. Can you
Yeah.
can you kind of just give us some information on why that happens? If there's been studies done on that?
Yeah, so we still don't know why that happens. There was a paper that was published recently on golden cat, and he studied them in Arunachal, and it was a very interesting paper. And he's put forth some hypotheses where he says probably in higher elevations you find the solid colors and the darker colors, and the lower elevations you find the other patterns and the lighter shades, and probably the ones we still don't know why. These are all just hypotheses and which need to be tested. So in fact, a group of like some of us now are putting together all these patterns from across the globe. It's quite like we've asked everybody who's not everybody, I mean a lot of people who are researching small cats, especially in golden cat areas, to collaborate with us and share their pictures. And so it became really difficult because we were first trying to look at, these color patterns are not discrete, they are a continuous spectrum. So they're shades of different colors, so it becomes difficult to even categorize them. So yeah, basically that's what we are trying to do now. We're trying to see why is it that the kind of variation that's there first, and why is this variation? Why is this cat so, why does it have so many coat colors?
That's interesting. Thank you. So it's only been observed in the golden cat that the variation is so prominent and across so extreme, is it?
Well, there
Across
are
the
some other cats, like I showed you, the spots on the leopard cat are very different.
Yes.
When and you have even another cat called the Jaguarundi in South America. They occur in two different forms, the red and the black, like the golden cat. But the golden cat has, of course, I think the golden cat has the maximum variation of coat color and pattern in the cat family.
That's very interesting and fascinating, and yeah, scope for a lot more studies in that area.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. So did anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, good evening. When is the last sighting of an Asiatic cheetah in India?
Oh, I don't know. I think it was sometime in the 60s, because that's when the last one was shot, apparently. And after that, nobody has seen them. So they believe, that's what they believe, that the cheetah went extinct sometime in the 1950s or 60s. Yeah.
And does it look the same as the African cousin?
I think there is a slight difference, especially in the, if I'm not mistaken, the tip of the tail. I think in the Asiatic one, which now occurs only in Iran, and I think the tip of the tail is pale, whereas in the African cheetah, it is black. It has a black tip. I'm not very sure of this, but I think that is one of the differences. And I think because, again, I don't know the Asiatic cheetah, because now you find them only in Iran. And because climatically it's very different from here, maybe the coat color would be paler over there than it would be here. So I'm not sure if the coat, the paler coat color of the Iranian cheetah is actually indicative of a difference between the African and the Asiatic.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? I see
Good
some.
evening, Shomita. Sarvana here.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Thank you for the lovely presentation. It was very insightful.
Thank
I have a question. A couple of years ago in the Nilgiris near Mukurti National Park, there was a kind of a confirmed sighting of a pale or albino tiger, white tiger. Could you give us
Yeah.
a little more information on is it true or what exactly has happened?
I
Thank you.
am not sure of that, but albinism can happen just as melanism can happen. So you have a lot of melanistic cats, right? You have like the melanistic leopard, which is a black leopard, and I showed you the melanistic golden cat. You also have a melanistic jungle cat. So I don't see why albinism also should not occur. So I don't think it could happen. So apparently in Madhya Pradesh, in this place called Rewa, they found these albinistic tigers, right?
The reason I asked was because I used to work in Bandhavgarh earlier
Yeah.
as a naturalist there, and the family that I worked actually are from the royal family of Rewa, and it was their ancestors who shot the last Mohan, the tiger, the white tiger.
Yeah.
So I saw the trophy of a white tiger. So and then the 2 years back, there was confirmed photographic evidence from Mukurti National Park. So that's the
Okay.
reason I asked. Like after so many decades, they said we found one again, or
Okay.
two actually.
Okay. So the thing is, melanism has an evolutionary angle to it. Like, melanism is probably selected for, especially in dense forested areas, because, it helps them, to hide, or it helps in being more cryptic because it blends with, in camouflaging. Whereas albinism actually would not really be selected for simply because it doesn't have an advantage and could have a disadvantage. So so I guess that's the reason why albinism is not very common either.
Right. Thank you, Shomita. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, can I ask again?
Yes, please go ahead.
It's related to the question on the melanism and albinism. So I think there were some reports also of leopards that were albinistic, leucistic or something is what you call them, if I'm not
Perhaps.
mistaken. Yeah. Okay. So there were these reports from actually the Nilgiris. What do you think could what could lead to these kind of things? There was also a gore, an Indian gore that was in the
Yeah,
news
I've
recently.
seen the pictures
No,
of
you
the
saw that
gore.
news?
Yeah, so these are
Yeah,
the genetic
yeah.
mutations that lead to albinism, just like
Mm-hmm.
in humans also.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are just genetic
Mm-hmm.
errors that
Okay.
happen. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we couldn't attribute it to climate or things like that, or
No,
diets, changing
no,
diets. No.
probably
Mm-hmm.
not. That's what I meant by saying that melanism is selected for, or could be
Mm-hmm.
selected for, because it has an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you're melanistic and you're in the forest,
Yeah,
it helps you to hide better
of
or to
course.
camouflage better.
Sure,
And
sure.
I think in jaguars, they have found that jaguars who live in deep forests are more melanistic. You find,
Okay.
and even in leopards, you find more melanistic leopards in forested areas rather than in the more
Mm-hmm.
open,
Open.
open habitats. Like in the
Okay.
rainforest, you have a higher chance of getting melanistic leopards. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
albinism doesn't have that kind of advantage, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't know
Right.
if albinism comes with other costs as well, because in humans, I think it does, with
Mm.
other physiological changes also. So I don't know about
Yeah.
animals, whether albinism impacts them the same way.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was very interesting. Yeah, wondering whether there's any studies on albinism, like you said, to say whether it's just a genetic mutation, drift, and other cause associated. Sounds interesting, and whether we know enough about it. Are there any more questions? We do have some more time before. So, would you know? Are there any studies done on this albinism, like you said, melanistic can maybe be explained for, but for
Yeah.
albinism in lions and on all big small cats, are there any studies that are being done anywhere across the globe, kind of exploring?
None that I know of.
Okay.
None that I know of. At least not in the wild. I don't know about the larger cats. I guess there are because they are bred.
Yes.
Very often they are bred to be albinistic because of whatever somebody's preference. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's any study that's been done on the other smaller wild cats.
No gene studies done to identify and say what the gene is doing.
No, not really. I think a lot of attention is on the melanism bit because that is natural, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I mean, as in even albinism is natural. I'm not saying no, but melanism, as I said, is a trait that is more common. And so they're trying to find patterns of where do melanistic, like individuals, do they occur in particular areas? Does it have a selective advantage and stuff like that?
Agreed. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
nothing like that similarly for albinism as far as I know.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for that.
Shomita, I have another question.
Yeah.
This is regarding the Asiatic cheetahs. There was a plans to reintroduce Asiatic cheetahs from Iran back to central India or other parts where have the long expanse spaces.
Yeah.
Do you think after so many decades, introducing a wild species from a different part of the world, though it's from the same species, will it be successful to do it in India now?
Yeah, so the thing is, see, there are two sides to that argument. There's one that says that the ones who are doing it, I mean, they're already doing it actually, if I'm not mistaken. They're already, they've progressed in their talks. And so what they say is that that's the only way to save our grasslands, because nobody pays attention to areas that are not really tiger territory anymore, right? So you have like these large swaths of land in Rajasthan and Gujarat, which are not really in anybody's priorities for conservation. And actually, if you look at Rajasthan and even areas towards the north like Punjab and Haryana, almost everything is converted to agriculture, and a lot of natural habitat, which is sandy areas or scrub areas, are termed as wasteland. So that wasteland, that category, is extremely dangerous because that really moves it a step forward for converting it to any other purpose. And so they say that's one of the ways. Like they've started with the Great Indian Bustard over there now, and then they say they also want to reintroduce the cheetah over there. Now, I don't know what will happen. I mean, of course, there are other angles to it, right? The other side of the argument is that, habitats are, you're probably going to be introducing conflict more than anything else. So we really don't know. We really don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, really.
Okay, thank you.
It's like we destroy and then we try to create. So I don't know. I think we play too much of this God business over here, like we are God. So I really don't know whether it's
the European grey wolf in different parts of Europe, right? They're trying to bring them back, but the farm owners and they're not happy because they lose the livestock.
Exactly.
Not
just the grey wolf, even the lynx. Because the Iberian lynx was like in a very, very precarious condition, and then they released, several of them. But then many of them got into conflict because over there, these are the large predators. They don't have predators like we have. They don't have tigers and leopards or predators that are that large. So for them, the wolf and the lynx are the large ones. And so, yes, you're in a way introducing conflict. Fortunately, I guess our farmers are somewhat different from theirs in the sense a lot of them are small landholders and they're used to having, animals around. There is probably a greater link or attachment to nature than in other areas. I don't know. But having a large cat around, I guess, is a very different ball game.
Mhm.
So when you
Thank
talk
you.
to the farmers around the country, whether it's in the Northeast or even in Rajasthan, and they say that the small cats, they have no problem with small cats. Like some of them will say, oh, they kill our chickens, but they don't think it's such a big deal. And they basically don't, in fact, they admit that the small cats are probably helping them, but they don't really, the next step has not come about where they actually think positively about them. So, but I don't know about the cheetah. It's like I said, it's different. It's a big cat.
Thank you. Thank you, Shamita.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think we have about 5 minutes more. Somebody has any? We have time for another question, maybe, before we close the session. Taking up from where Saravana Kumar was asking about the reintroduction of the cheetah. So when you were talking about that, I was thinking also about the prey base, right? When you introduce the cheetah, then what about the successive the food pyramid all the way down? Is it all in place, and would that have implications in a new area? Are we thinking along those lines besides the human interaction angle of it? So
yeah. So the prey, in fact, the prey for the cheetah is already there. And I guess once the cheetah was removed, a lot of other things started happening, right? The conflict started between the prey and the humans for crop depredation and stuff like that.
right.
Also, so they believe. Yeah? So there are a lot of prey for the cheetah. I mean, you have the black buck, you have the chinkara, you have nilgai. I don't know if the cheetah kills nilgai, but well, you have a lot of herbivores around.
Right.
So in fact, one of the problems was, or maybe that, they are introducing, they're going to start reintroducing bustards over there, the Great Indian bustard. What if the cheetah kills the bustards?
Exactly.
So, but then probably they won't reintroduce them in the same areas. We don't know if they will spread, but well, to begin with, I'm sure they won't reintroduce them into the same areas.
Yeah, I hope so. Yes. So I think it's been a very informative session, and it's been a very interactive session as well, and very colorful from all the visual images that you've shared. We still have time for a question if somebody has one last question before we call it a day.
I think we should keep it for the next session. Oh, sorry.
One short question. Sorry, Anita. Sorry, one short
No,
question.
no, go ahead.
Shomita, what inspired you to take up this subject, to follow and study these cats?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's in my genes. My grandfather loved cats, and my father loved cats, and from the time I was a kid, I'm just passionately fond of cats, and yeah, well, I guess that's what led me here.
Best wishes. Keep it going. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent way to close the session. So for all of you who have joined us today, it's going to be raining cats next weekend also. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
We're going to have another session with Shamita, this time more on how to study cats and all that follows along those lines. Thank you so much for such an interesting, fun session. We loved having you. And we hope to see and hear more about cats next weekend. And thanks to all of you who made it today. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, I think that's all we have from our side. If there's nothing else, we'll close it and call it a day. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Shraddha. Thank you so much. And thanks, everyone.